welcome everybody. Good evening. Thank you for making the time for this call. I'm just going to wait a few minutes while people get online. But maybe one thing that's kind of fun to know is in the chat box, so at the bottom of the screen, maybe you can just write where you're calling in from. City, state, country. Just so we have a sense of who's calling in from where. Okay, so we got some folks from the Bay Area, some from the East Coast, Colorado, Northwest, someone from Australia. That must be about midday in Australia. And Southwest and local. All right, nice to just get a little sense if you're just joining, just asking people where they're calling in from. Of course, if you're calling in, there's a lot of non-video participants, so maybe you can still write in on your phone. Someone calling in from Jamaica, that's cool. Got a few night owls on the call. There's a few people. It's going to be quite late. So you're welcome to. Anyhow, let me just formally start this now. It's past 6 o'clock. So welcome everybody. Nice to see faces. Some familiar faces. Some new faces. Yeah, so welcome to our new Dharma teaching reality. Someone just sent me a link to a list of all the different Dharma teachings that are happening, mindfulness teachings, meditation teachings, and there's a lot. You can spend all day on your computer from 6 a.m. Pacific time through till probably bedtime and be meditated out, which is kind of interesting and wonderful reality that we're living in, that we can actually, despite being in shelter in place, which many of us are, if not most of us, we can still actually connect with each other and meditate together and receive wonderful, current, relevant Dharma teachings and stay connected virtually. So, yeah. So what we'll do tonight, we'll meditate a little bit together. And then I'll give a talk on just some reflections around practicing in these times. And then open up for questions. So if you do have questions, you can just put them in the chat box and I'll get to them at the end of the session. So wherever you are, finding a comfortable posture. And if it feels more comfortable, you can turn your video off or not. And I have you all muted. It's not because I don't want to hear you say anything, but that's later. And Yeah, and you can close your eyes and or lower your gaze and shift that attention away from the screen to your inner world. And as you make that shift to away from that external orientation to the screen and to activity and to people and place, and you turn the lens of awareness inwards, as it were, begin to notice what opens up, what's revealed in the inner life that often gets less attention. What immediately becomes apparent when you turn the gaze inwards. Where is attention called? And you may begin to notice the immediate field of sensory experience of body. And so beginning that process of inhabiting bodily experience with awareness. And what in this field of sensation can be felt. Perhaps the touch of your body on the chair, your feet on the ground, touch of clothing against the skin, and the warmth or coolness of air. Noticing all the ways the body is in contact with your environment through touch, clothing, air. Body always in relationship with where we are. And going inwards, sensing within the body all the range of sensations, warmth and coolness, heaviness and lightness, tingling, vibration, pressure. And the body in this moment is like this, changing like this. And within that field of body, aware of the movement of breath, of air, as it enters the nostrils, as it's felt in the nose, in the throat, in the lifting and expansion of the chest and the rib cage and the belly, and the falling, the exhaling, releasing. And allowing the awareness to suffuse the experience of breathing, feeling and sensing that whole rich movement of sensation. Sensing and aware of sensing, breathing, aware of breathing, happening by itself, simply attending to this moment-to-moment changing physical universe called body. And if for some reason the breath is not a helpful anchor for the attention, then simply keep awareness to the sensations of the body other than the breath. And of course, awareness will notice many other things in the experience: sounds, human sounds, nature sounds, and allowing awareness of hearing to be a support for present moment awareness. No need to get lost in thinking about the source of the sound. Natural for the attention to be caught in the flutterings of the mind and thoughts, and images, memories, plans, and acknowledging that natural process for attention to wander there, and inviting the attention over and over to ground in the body, in sensation, and breath, hearing. And at times as you practice, also aware of the landscape of the heart, noticing when emotions, moods, feelings, states of mind, particularly the waves that come through the heart, felt in the body, joy, sadness, anxiety, calm, fear, happiness. Meeting whatever arises with a kind attention, with curiosity, feeling whatever wave is present in the heart, in the body, naming it. Oh, sadness like this, fear like this, anxiety feels like this. And bringing a kind attention. Feeling the wave come and go. And if any emotion that arises is strong, difficult to be with, acknowledging it and shifting the attention to something more neutral, like sounds, feeling the contact of your body with the ground, anywhere that allows the body and nervous system to feel a sense of ease. abiding in awareness, simple, clear knowing of experience, moment to moment. This last couple of minutes of the sitting, and just tuning into the landscape of the heart, and noticing how you're feeling both in this moment, in this meditation, but also in the broader picture of living in these times, perhaps sheltered at home, dealing with whatever arises around the pandemic. And noticing, seeing if you can meet whatever's here that's arising in you in these times with kindness, with self-care and compassion. Sometimes putting a hand on your heart, very simple, soothing way to feel a sense of warmth and kindness for yourself. And perhaps offering yourself a wish, like, may I find peace and ease during these times. May I meet whatever arises with as much kindness as I'm able to bring. May our practice be for the welfare and the happiness of all life, particularly those who are sick, and particularly those who are on the front lines helping to care for the sick. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Nice to sit with you. This is the second online teaching I've given since the pandemic really erupted. I've been in a lot of retreats in February and early March, and some of those in the wilderness, and then on retreat myself at home. And so it's been interesting to start to shift from in-person retreats and teachings to online, particularly appreciating Zoom, to be able to see some of your faces really helps, rather than giving a talk to some computer screen, which I did on Monday night when I was teaching for Spirit Rock. So I want to read something. I'm sure you've all been reading, as I have, a lot of things, spending a lot of time online, staying connected or staying current with events. And I found this piece today that I came across in The Guardian, touched me in a way that none of the other writings have touched me. And I think partly because it was very personal, and partly because it's from a famous Italian novelist, Francesca Melandri, and she's writing to fellow Europeans, but I think particularly to the British, who are way behind the curve in terms of their response to the virus. And the letter's called From Your Future. And she's just laying out some of the things that people will experience in the coming weeks, which we and you are probably experiencing some of these things. She writes, "We are but a few steps ahead of you in the path of time, just like Wuhan was a few weeks ahead of us." Remember, she's writing from Italy. "You'll find in this time dozens of social networking groups with tutorials on how to spend your free time in fruitful ways. You will join them all and then ignore them completely after a few days. You will miss your adult children like you never have before. The realization that you have no idea when you'll ever see them again, will hit you like a punch in the chest. And then you will eat again, and you will not sleep well. You will wonder what is happening to all those who can't stay home because they don't have a home. You will feel vulnerable when going out shopping in the deserted streets, especially if you're a woman. You will ask yourselves if this is how societies collapse. Does it really happen so fast? You'll block out these thoughts, and when you get back home, you'll eat again." Again, this is written from an Italian. "You will put on weight. You'll look for online fitness training and then not do it. You'll laugh a lot. You'll flaunt a gallows humor you've never had before. Living at home, you will count all the things you do not need. The true nature of people around you will be revealed with total clarity. You will have confirmations and surprises. Old resentments and falling outs will seem irrelevant. You will call people you had sworn never to talk to ever again, and to simply ask them, how are you doing? You will play music from your windows and lawns. When you saw us singing opera from our balconies, you thought, oh, those Italians. But we know you will sing uplifting songs to each other too. And when you blast, I Will Survive from your windows, we'll watch you and nod just like the people of Wuhan who sung from their windows in February, nodded while watching us. Many children will be conceived. Many of you will fall asleep vowing that the first thing you'll do as soon as lockdown is over is file for divorce. Elderly people will disobey you like rowdy teenagers. You'll have to fight with them in order to forbid them going out to get infected and die. You will try not to think about the lonely deaths inside the ICU. So powerful. You'll want to cover with rose petals all medical workers' steps. You will be told that society is united in a communal effort, that you are all in the same boat. It will be true. This experience will change for good how you perceive yourself as an individual part of a larger whole. At some point, you will realize it's tough. You will be afraid. You will share your fear with your loved ones, or you will keep it to yourselves so as not to burden with it too. And you will eat again. And on it goes. I don't know about you, maybe some of you already read that, but I found that tremendously moving because it's really written inside the experience of the tragedy and the opportunity, the pain and the gifts. And I think what I like about it is she's really pointing to shared humanity and shared vulnerability. And I think this time is revealing that more than anything, is how vulnerable we are. The virus has no passport, makes a mockery of borders, and touches everyone equally, relatively equally. So I want to share some thoughts about practice, like how, our practice is preparing us, some would say our practice is a preparation for death. And that's certainly true in the Buddhist tradition, that our practice is preparing us for uncertainty and for facing the truth of experience, as hard and as unpleasant as that might be. And so the question that we can ask ourselves is, how do we want to be in these times? How do we want to show up in these times? How do we practice in these times? Right? In every moment, awareness reveals, we have a responsiveness to the moment, and how we respond, how we are present, how we act matters. Right? Are we acting in a way that's contributing to greater suffering, or are we actually acting in a way that's supporting ourselves, supporting each other? It's a beautiful piece that went round the net. And again, apologies if you've already read this, but I think it bears hearing again. This is really about the responsiveness and how we can be present, how we can choose to act. And I love that I'm looking, one of the screens has a very cute picture of a cat. So we have a very wise Dharma cat on the call. Maybe the cat will give us some teachings. I'm hearing that the dogs are very happy because all the owners are home, but I'm hearing the cats are not so happy about that. But I'm sure that varies. Anyhow, this is Lockdown by Brother Richard. Yes, there is fear, isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there's sickness, even death. But they say in the Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other, as we just heard about, across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family noise around them. They say a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the household. Today, a young woman I knew is busy spreading flyers with her number through the neighborhood so that the elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, sick, and the weary. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbors in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we have, to what really matters, to love. And so we pray and remember that yes, there is fear, but there doesn't have to be hate. There is isolation, but there doesn't have to be loneliness. There is panic buying, but there doesn't have to be meanness. There is sickness, but there doesn't have to be disease of the soul. So I think these are beautiful words because they speak to the possibility and hopefully what we've realized in our practice of awareness, of kindness, of compassion, that we have influence about how we respond to experience. So I want to share reflections about a few things. I want to speak to the place of awareness and awareness practice in how that can support us. I want to talk about balance, how we stay balanced, particularly emotionally with the overwhelm and the intensity and the need for resourcing. And I want to speak to compassion. And I call it the ABC of practice: awareness, balance, and compassion. So starting with awareness, and practice from my perspective always starts with awareness. How do we awake and present to what's happening both externally and internally, right? And this pandemic is demanding that we wake up and be present. We become aware of what's happening in the world. We become aware of what's happening in the intensity of our inner experience. We become aware of the impact we're having on others. We become aware of what our role is and what our responsibility is in responding. So from a very simple, basic awareness, just as we practice in the meditation, right? One of the things that we're being asked to do for the welfare of ourselves, but really for the welfare of others, be mindful of our body, be mindful of what we're doing with our body, be mindful of keeping 6 feet distance, which some people are doing, some people are not. Be mindful of touching your face. Without being mindful, how can you know what you're doing with your face, with your hands? I was on a call recently with my family, with a Zoom call, and family from 3 different countries. And my dear nephew was on the call also, and he's working in media and having to go into work every day. And he was calling in from the studio, and I couldn't help noticing that he kept touching his face. I asked him, please, you're working in a very public building, like, please watch what you're doing with your hands. Without mindfulness, you're not going to know what you're doing with your hands or with your physical distance or being able to track symptoms. So, and we need to be aware of our body and what it needs. We need to stay healthy. We need to stay rested. We need to stay well nourished. We need to stay well hydrated. And these are very basic things, but our practice, mindfulness practice, helps us in some very basic ways. Listening to the body, this is a very profound practice, to be attuned to the body and what it needs, right? The more resourced the body is right now, the healthier we're going to be, the better resilience we have. One of the blessings that I think of this time for those people who are not having to commute anymore and are at home more is the possibility, not available for everybody by any means, but for some people to rest more. And I know when the shelter at home first started, people were sort of jokingly saying, oh, well, at least I'll get to clean my house or clean the closets or throw out all the junk in the garage or go to my storage unit. And most of that's not happening. And I think what's more important than all of that is that we rest, that we take care of ourselves. The level of stress that our bodies are feeling with the fear and the anxiety or the panic or worrying about relatives or running all the different things you could be worrying about, very draining on the nervous system. So just want to invite that quality of rest. This is from John O'Donohue, called Time to Be Slow. This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, when the air will be kind and blushed with beginning. This is the time to be slow, lie to the wall until the bitter weather passes. And so what can we do to slow down in a way that's supportive of our nervous system, supportive of our health, supportive of the health of others? Perhaps one of the greatest gifts that awareness practice gives us is we get to understand our mind. And our mind in these times of collective fear and panic can be a tyrant, or it can be an incredible ally. Right? And so notice those times that the mind is incredibly helpful, and notice those times when the mind is actually significantly escalating the fear, the panic, the worry, the uncertainty, the unknown, and exacerbating the stress and the suffering. This whole situation is stressful and a lot of suffering for many people. But without awareness of our mind and what it's doing, what happens is the mind starts what the Buddha called we get caught in papancha, proliferating. We start catastrophizing, imagining all the worst case scenarios, which of course could happen. But our mind proliferates in a way that we feel panic, we feel anxiety, we feel terror, all about a thought that's not actually necessarily happening in the moment. And so we want to be really mindful. What's our mind doing? And this is the gift of practice. When we have a mind that's trained, we have a little more awareness and a little more discipline about what the mind is doing, where our thoughts are going, and asking and questioning, inquiring, is this thought helpful? Is this chain of proliferating thoughts about the possible future really helpful, or is it just whipping up unnecessary fear and anxiety and panic? Versus the difference between thoughts that might be driven by anxiety, but actually have some purpose, or some, sometimes the fear in our nervous system invites a certain thinking around, alerting us that there may be some action that needs to happen. I was teaching in England, and a student was in Italy. This was before the situation in Italy had escalated, but just started to. And she was worried naturally about herself, but also coming to the training where there was 30 people in close proximity. And that concern, at times anxiety for her, fear for her, made her wisely strategize and decide the best thing to do would be to fly home to the States and to quarantine herself for fear of risking other people's health. So knowing when our thinking is helpful, knowing when it's counterproductive, knowing how we can recognize our thoughts and we can release them. We don't have to believe in any thought. We don't have to follow any thought. And the more we can create space in our mind, and the more we can think clearly, the more we can actually settle. No great wisdom or wise action comes from a very, very activated mind. Literally, our prefrontal cortex goes offline when we're in an activated, triggered state. Right? So we need to learn how to use the body to calm, to ground, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Probably the biggest place that we're needing to bring mindfulness right now, aside from the body, is with our heart, with the turbulence of emotions. I don't know anybody who's not had some intense waves, some experience of being on a roller coaster. Strong feelings, fear, anxiety, panic, loss, grief, rage, helplessness, fear about their own welfare, fear about their family's welfare, fear about not being able to make it to see relatives who are far away, perhaps in different countries like mine are. So I got a note from my assistant the other day. who I think summed up, how a lot of people are feeling. She said, anxiety has definitely hit me in a way that it never has before. These days I'm waking up earlier. I'm not a morning person naturally, and I'm waking up with a stomach full of butterflies. I have to do several minutes of deep breathing and then do a guided meditation to calm my nerves before I get out of bed. That's before she started the day. So, and she's feeling really appreciative of the practice, right? That we have resources, we have tools like breath, like meditation, like grounding, like shifting the attention. So a lot of different emotions arising. Some of them are ours. Some of them I think are in the field. Some of them are perhaps with the people we're living with or around. Right? We're experiencing a lot of emotional contagion right now. And that's an important discernment to bring in itself. Is what I'm feeling, this anxiety, this fear, mine, or am I also picking it up from the field? And those emotions are very natural, right? There is a lack of control. There is an uncertainty. There is a risk of sickness and death for ourselves or others. There is an inability to reach relatives. There is the awareness that some people we know and love might die alone in the ICU. That's real. Right? And our practice is hopefully supporting us to face that reality. Dharma teachings from the very beginning. The Buddha is very clear. The last words, all conditioned things are impermanent. This life is fragile, uncertain, unreliable. That's what we practice with. That's why we train, so we can stay steady with those truths. Doesn't make them easy, doesn't make them go away. So there's one practice that I think is very helpful, and I'd like us to do a little bit of that right now. It's called the rain practice, which I'm so sure many, if not most of you, are familiar with. And it's just a simple step-by-step process we can use to meet our emotional experience with these 4 steps. The mnemonic RAIN, R, to recognize what's happening. The A is for allow or accept what's here. The I is to bring an intimate quality of investigation to experience. And lastly, to nourish with kindness. So let's just take a moment, let's pause in this speaking and close your eyes. And this closing your eyes isn't a helpful thing to do with your eyes. And just take a moment, take a few deeper breaths. And just bring to mind either emotions that have been arising here in these last days and weeks, or when you hear me talking about the pandemic and loss of control, fears of being sick, or maybe you are dealing with sickness already. Take a moment. What arises for you when you think about this crisis we're in? Sadness, grief, loss, fear, equanimity. So naming that experience, right? The first step is to recognize, oh, what's here? Oh, I feel sadness, or I feel mild anxiety, I feel who knows what. Naming it, oh, sadness, welcome sadness. Just like this. And the second step is to allow. Oh, so welcoming and receiving rather than resisting, pushing, fighting. It's here, so can we make space? Oh, sadness like this, calm like this, anxiety like this. And then the eyes to become intimate, to investigate, oh, what does this feeling feel like? Where do I feel it in my body? Is it in my tightness in my jaw? Is it in butterflies in my belly, or tightness in my solar plexus, or heaviness in the heart, constriction of the throat, shortness of breath? Notice what makes it stronger, maybe continuing to think about some trigger. Noticing what allows it to settle. Like if we take some slower exhales, or we feel our feet sitting grounded on the floor. Notice how it comes and goes. Notice your attitude towards it. Resistance, judging, rejecting, accepting, allowing. Can you bring a quality, lastly, to nourish with kindness? Can we bring warmth or care or compassion to that feeling, or ourselves and our bodies in that place? Can we put a hand on the heart, or wherever you're feeling that experience stronger? And that hand on the body is a gesture of soothing, of calm, of connection. Maybe offering yourself a wish. May my heart be at ease during these times. May I find steadiness amidst the anxiety and fear. May I hold whatever comes with kindness. Taking breaths. Sensing your legs, your feet touching the ground, your hands. And opening your eyes. So sometimes that simple practice of rain, or just being aware or taking deep breaths, can help. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we need more stronger kind of resourcing tools, and particularly if it's tapping into some kind of traumatic response. Sometimes the breath works. Sometimes, as someone asked a question, I find the breath not so helpful during these times. And often the breath, if we're feeling anxious or fearful, being with the breath actually can escalate sense of triggeredness, and so sometimes the breath isn't a resource. So shifting from the breath, if you can, noticing if there's a space in the body that feels calm or grounded, legs, hands. If there's nowhere in the body, we shift our attention to something wider. We listen to sounds. We're aware of the space, aware of stillness in the room. That doesn't help. We open the eyes and we look around. We look outside. Like right now, I'm looking at the clouds and the sky, and I'm seeing a sense of space, and that immediately allows my nervous system to settle, because I'm shifting attention away from the from whatever's happening in the body to something beautiful, something calming. Sometimes sitting is not helpful. We need to move, get up, we need to walk, stretch, do yoga, something more physical. Sometimes lying down on the earth, if you have access to the outdoors, putting your back or your belly on the earth can be very grounding and soothing. An important thing to remember with balance is to remember what we're doing with our attention. We're living in this attention economy, and the news is grabbing our attention, and pretty much every news story is a sad, scary story about loss, an escalation. And so just being really mindful what you do with your attention, right? Just like all those things I just mentioned about breath and body and sound and sight and clouds are all, and music, another way is a way to shift the attention. Right? The Buddha said, whatever the mind frequently dwells and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind and the heart. If we incline towards the news 16 hours a day, of course our nervous system is going to be activated. If we can be mindful of that input, stay informed, and also shift our attention to that which is also nourishing and supporting beauty, nature particularly. I spend a lot of time teaching and being in nature, resourcing in nature. I'm starting a daily meditation practice on Zoom tomorrow. You probably heard sunrise meditation, 7 a.m. Pacific time, partly to orient people to nature. There's a lot of wonderful teachings happening right now online. I haven't seen any offering the resource of nature. And so just tuning into simple rhythms, sunrise, sunset, the star, the evening, the words eluding me, but the night stars, paying attention to the wind and clouds and rain, even if you're in the city, the smells, the tree that's on your street, the birds that come by, spring blossoms. It's spring right now, and so where I live in Northern California, it's abundant with blossoms, and I make sure when I walk past a blossom to bury my nose in it. Jasmine flowers and apple and plum blossoms and whatnot. So to attune to what supports you, what uplifts you. Maybe music. Music can be an incredible quick way to shift the attention. But for some people, it's being more physical. As I said, moving, but it might be gardening. It might be cooking. It might be even house cleaning is a way to move the energy. Action eats anxiety. And so if we move, walking, some kind of activity, doing something with our hands like gardening, etc. It's a way of moving that energy. Taking care of others can be a way to move that energy, to resource, to ground. Right? Shifting attention to things that bring some lightness, like that reading that I read in the beginning about, you will find your, I forget how she put it, your humor gets really dark. And there's a lot of very funny things being sent around that it's good to laugh if we can. It's good to find something to either poking fun at ourselves or our crazy human nature. So just asking for yourself right now, what allows you to resource? Just take a moment, just close your eyes. What are the 3 things that are most effective for you to resource? My resource, I mean, that allow you to bring your attention to them, and by doing so allows you to feel either grounded, calm, relaxed, clear, happy, easeful. An important thing I didn't mention is connection. Right? So many of us are limited by our social connection, but it may be calling someone, having a Skype chat, having a chat with your neighbors from a safe distance. Right? And if it was hard to come up with 3 things, then give this some attention. Ideally, you want a list of at least 10 things that you know helps you resource. For me, it's nature, beauty, music, for example, food in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way. So yeah, so balance. So last couple things to say about balance. Balancing on news input, I've already mentioned that. But also balance the dynamic between doing and non-doing. Right? And I was reading something written from one of the 13 grandmothers who are wise elders from around the world. And one of the things that she was saying is, this is a time to slow down, just as John O'Donoghue was saying, this is a time to step off the wheel of generating GDP and keeping the economy moving. This is a time to look within, to take care of oneself and each other, to slow down. So, and of course, in this, for many of us, enforced slowdown, it brings up issues of identity, of who I am if I'm not doing, if I'm not productive, if I'm not going to work, if I'm not accomplishing, if I'm not, doing all these things I know myself to be. What is it like if we have the luxury to step off that wheel of going, being a human doing, not a human being? What is it like to pause? What is it like to rest? What is it like to do nothing, which is, I think, non-doing meditation is an advanced meditation. It's an advanced practice because we're so comfortable being busy, doing, accomplishing. So we've looked at awareness, A, looked at balance, B, and C is compassion. How do we respond to suffering in ourselves and our loved ones and circle and the world? How do we meet that with kindness? Right? One of the great teachings of this epidemic, this pandemic, is in a very radical and ruthless way showing us our connection, our interconnection, our intertwinedness, how our actions have impact. We're waking up individually as a species about how our actions impact others. We're slow to learn that around climate. We're learning that about human contact and viruses. And I'd say for me, the most powerful and instructive and beautiful thing that I've seen happening in the world, particularly in Western culture, this is, like when I travel in Asia, this is very much, I would say, part of the cultural values of caring for community and family beyond oneself or before oneself. And what I see waking up happening around people washing their hands and social distancing and wearing masks and sanitizing, not for themselves, although obviously for themselves, but for the greater good, to flatten the curve of the epidemic, to support the healthcare system and not overwhelming doctors and nurses. And the more we take care of our individual actions, social isolation, and all the stuff that we've been hearing about so much, like seeing people doing that on the behalf of others is, I think, a radical shift in consciousness that, of course, we need to wake up as a species about many things, particularly climate, but also now around health. So waking up to our deep interconnection. And then, as does any crisis bring out, tremendous compassion, tremendous caring from people to one another, looking after the sick. And I think of the bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva is someone who dedicates their lives to the relief of suffering of others. I think about the doctors and nurses and the medics in Italy who go to the front lines every day, and many, many doctors and many, many nurses. There was one report I listened to from the Times. Some of you may have heard that interview. Doctor working, I think, in Lombardy, 3 days a week, 7 days a week, 24/7, 365 days a year, and 450 of the nurses had been sent home because they were sick, at risk of being sick. Many doctors had died, losing 20 patients a day in that hospital, having to decide between who lives and who dies with a ventilator. And just a tremendous selfless service, just incredible what our healthcare workers are doing all around the world. I love that in Italy, there was a time where there was a national pausing and applauding for the healthcare workers, and people got on the balconies and they clapped and they banged pots and they sang. There was reports from, I think perhaps the same report I was reading, where somebody stood on the balcony and told a reporter, we're a community, not a bunch of individuals. And that's something I think that's very powerful that we're waking up to, is this sense of common humanity, and how we are and how we act makes a tremendous difference, life or death. I've also just been inspired to see what people are doing for each other, whether it's playing piano on their balconies and the viola, and people walking around Florence singing opera for people who are secluded at home. There's a lovely story of a Japanese girl who spent 85,000 yen on material so she made 600-700 masks for the local hospital. Just incredible stories of people showing up. There was a request from the UK government for Meals on Wheels, which is a national service. It's been going, I think, since the war. And they needed 250,000 extra drivers to deliver food, mostly to the elderly and the sick, and they got 400,000 offers. So almost twice as many people wanting to help. This often can bring out the best in humanity. I just read about a spirits manufacturer who is donating enough alcohol to make 8 million bottles of hand sanitizer to get to healthcare workers around the world. Many amazing actions, big and small. I wanted to read this poem from Jane Hirschfield, who's a wonderful poet who was asked to write a poem about the virus. And she had just happened to have written a poem that day, and it shows about what we can do. The poem's called "Today When I Could Do Nothing." Today when I could do nothing, I saved an ant. It must have come in with the morning paper still being delivered to those who shelter in place. A morning paper is still an essential service. I am not an essential service. I have coffee and books, time, a garden, silence, enough to fill systems. It must have first walked the morning paper as if loosened ink taking the shape of an ant, then across the laptop, warm, then onto the back of a cushion. Small black ant, alone, crossing a navy cushion, moving steadily because that is what it could do. Set outside in the sun, it could have not have found again its nest. What then did I save? It did not move as if it was frightened, even while walking my hand, which moved through swiftness and air. Ant, alone, without companions, whose ant heart I could not fathom. How is your life, I wanted to ask. I lifted it, I took it outside. The first day when I could do nothing, contribute nothing, beyond staying distance from my own kind, I did this. Okay, so we act in small ways, we act in large ways. And so to think, how can we use, what can we do given the severe restrictions on our mobility, on our ability to actually have face-to-face contact. What can we do to support our family or our friends or our neighbors or the homeless? What can we donate? What can we, there are many, many wonderful organizations in the Bay Area, many, many food delivery organizations to the homeless, including Meals on Wheels, Glide Church and others. So just want to close on a few points and then open up for questions. So it's important in our Dharma practice, and we remember this as much now as any other time, that we remember, as we're being reminded on a daily basis, the impermanent nature of things. That impermanence implies our vulnerability. It also implies that this too will pass. Right? May and probably will get worse before it passes, but will pass. To take refuge in that truth. To ask of oneself, how can I help? How can I respond? And to look at how you're meeting experience. Is what you're doing, thinking, feeling, acting, helping or hindering yourself or others? You know, at the most profound, it's really confronting our own mortality and our fear of death of ourselves and people we love. And of course, Dharma teachings are first and foremost to remind us that we will lose everything sooner or later. And that's why we practice, to meet these harsh realities of life with kindness, with compassion. So I'm going to close with a short reading from Maria Popova, talking about this facing extinction. She says, "It is our biological destiny to exist and then not. Each of us eventually returns their stardust to the universe, to be constellated into some other ephemeral emissary of space-time. Eventually, our entire species will be the way of the dinosaurs and the dodo and the romantics. Eventually, our home star will live out its final moments in a wild spin before collapsing into itself, taking with it everything we have ever known. Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the guillotine, and the perfect Fibonacci sequence of the pine cone." So I invited you to write any questions in the chat box. So please, if you have questions or comments or want me to speak about something, please write them in the box. The one question I got prior to this was about the breath, and I already mentioned that a little bit, that sometimes the breath is a go-to refuge for ourselves in our meditation, but sometimes if we're feeling panic or anxiety or fear, that the awareness of breath, just like when we're on the plane and we've hit turbulence, our breath can be very, very heightened and shortened, and shifting attention from the fear and the anxiety to resource, to grounding, can be helpful. How do we make space for grief? Well, many of us have a lot more space for a lot of things right now. So, and grief is one of those things that needs space, needs time, it needs a wide kind of berth, and it has waves, a lot of different waves. So, you know, what allows space for it is to turn our attention to it, to look at what's the source of that, what's triggering that. You know, take a meditation, take a walk, and to allow and invite those feelings to arise, knowing that they're wave-like, knowing that they're rhythmical. But as you mentioned, without space, a lot of our feelings won't arise. And what's interesting about this time, for those of you who are sheltering in place, particularly if you're alone or with one other person, that the space, just like on a retreat, the psyche recognizes space as a time to process. And so other deeper emotions often surface, like grief, like loss, etc. And so that's why, I think it's important that we don't get too busy. We don't fill our time with busyness and decluttering every closet that we can see, but actually take time to feel. Sit on the couch, sit on your cushion, and feel your body, feel your breath, feel your heart. And taking time to feel the emotion, like when you're reading, like when I read that article that I shared with you earlier about the writer writing from Italy, I had waves of sadness and grief come up. And so I just took some time, just like I didn't want to jump on the next article. Just like, okay, just close my laptop and just feel, take a moment. Oh yeah, this is, very tender, very real, like writing from the front line. And it sort of pierced a place in me of that shared common human vulnerability, common humanity. So we need to give it time and space. Please tell us again the name of the last poet and the poem. The last poet and the poem. The poet was Jane Hirshfield, and the poem was called Today When I Could Do Nothing. So I'm not seeing many notes on the chat. Do I have breathing exercises I could recommend? Well, depend if you can add, Chris, if you can say why, recommended for what, because it really matters depending on what you're needing. Can you speak about working with the inner critic? And it feels like my practice is failing, especially when steadiness and equanimity is lost. Yeah, while you and everybody else, steadiness and equanimity is lost. The critic, as I've written about in one of my earlier books, Make Peace with Your Mind, one of the least helpful parts of our mind. I think it's important that we, just as this time is a radical shift from much of what many of us have known, so our lives and our mind and our heart and our practice is going to look different. And one of the places I'm hearing the critic is arising for people is, I'm home now, I have all this time, and my practice has gone to hell. I get up, I read the newspapers, I have breakfast, and I read the newspapers, and there goes my morning practice time. Or I sit and my mind is all over the place because it's worried and fearful for my kids and my family. And so I think we want to be really kind and accepting of ourselves. One of the practices I gave to a student recently whose practice has gone out the window, who is a very steady meditator generally, is I said, just find a comfortable chair and just sit. Like, don't do anything. Don't try to meditate. Just as much as you can, just relax into your posture, relax into quality of being, and just simply being present to what's here. And noticing what you notice, not trying to get anywhere, not trying to apply a technique, just relax into your being, relax into yourself as much as you can and seeing what's here. Okay? And of course, our equanimity at times will go out the window. And of course, our steadfastness will. Right? These are challenging times. And so when that happens, can we then have some acceptance about that? Maybe you wake up in the night and you're terrified, or you wake up in the morning and you're depressed, or you wake up in the morning and you're anxious and you feel the lack of control. Yeah? And equanimity is like a distant memory. So, but we can still be mindful with the anxiety or with the fear, or shift our attention to something that's more workable. Put some music on, read a book, bring a kind attention to ourselves. Right? So equanimity is also about allowing what's here. And if instead of equanimity there's restlessness, then we bring mindfulness to restlessness. That's the way we bring equanimity to restlessness or confusion or whatever. So the questions. My usual acceptance of others' behavior and not interfering with others' personal choices is being challenged as I see loved ones making risky choices on social distancing. How does one find balance with this issue? To admit powerlessness over others, but also assert opinion or telling what really matters. Yeah, this is a tough one, Lisa, and I think it's happening. You know, I had that with my parents. Many friends are having it with their parents or children. You know, I think the youth, unbothered, many are unbothered. Teens, young adults, and many of our elders also. You know, of course, people have the right to do whatever they want. And I think it's also appropriate that we at least share with them what we know of the risks, share what we know, the harm that they may be causing to others. You know, I think we live in such an individualistic culture and bubble that people are often so unaware. They might not, you know, like a young person might not worry about their own health, but they don't realize that they're a vector. And by not following social distancing, they're putting other families and other people at risk. So I think it's completely appropriate to share what you know and what you can to encourage people to practice social distancing and other things of care, that's care for themselves and care for others. And of course, then we let go. You know, our practice is we make an intention, we act as wisely and as kindly as we can, which might be being very direct and confronting people doing things unskillful. And then we let go. We let go of the fruit of that action because it's out of our hands ultimately. Someone asked about the first poem I read. I don't remember what it was. I'm sorry. I read a poem about lockdown by Brother Richard. So someone suggesting a grounding practice as being to stand, do a standing practice and just simply moving the feet from one foot to the other. So just moving left and right, which is a form of rocking, which is a form of self-soothing. We can also do that in the sitting, just do it right now. If you just move gently side to side, right? It has a kind of a soothing quality, like being rocked in the crib. Just reading these notes and seeing if there's other questions. I feel pressure from work to be as productive as usual, and I'm finding that challenging with everything going on, trying to give myself permission to be less productive. Advice. Yeah, it's a tough one. If your boss or your company is expecting you to be productive and the last thing you're feeling is actually putting in long hours facing the computer. Yeah. Well, hopefully people at work will be forgiving for, changing levels of productivity. just because of stress and whatever people are facing. Often people having to work at home with kids, no childcare and all of that. So hopefully there's some support for your shifting, productivity, and maybe, if you can, having an honest conversation with your boss, supervisor, team. Mental health stress is a real stress, and many, if not most people, are dealing with that kind of stress. And then setting boundaries for yourself that feel workable and kind. So someone's appreciating just the reminder to practice. Yeah. So another thing I think is helpful to practice is really being mindful of our screen time, right? So like I just did a retreat for myself. It was supposed to be an in-person retreat, but it was online. But it was 7 hours a day looking at, sometimes 9 hours looking at the screen. It's a lot of screen time, right? And then checking emails or whatever else you might have to do. So just being mindful, there's a slight addictive, compulsive nature to wanting to be up to speed. It's almost like a dopamine hit to hear the latest news, the latest spread, the latest outbreak. And just be mindful of, being purposeful about screen time. When is it useful to look at screen time, to check your email and do your work and stay current? And when's it good to, close it down and look out the window, read a book, go for a walk, have a conversation. So, I think that self-awareness is really important. So I'm aware of the time. It's 7:27 Pacific time. So just see here. Yeah. Well, mostly I just want to thank you for taking the time for yourselves. I hope this was useful, that this is recorded. I'm not quite sure what the process is with, I think the same link that you have should be able to access the recording. But I think you're all registered, so we'll have your email so we can send you notification about the link if you want to watch it again. As I mentioned, I will be doing morning meditations if you want to watch the sunrise and have some guidance from 7 to roughly 8 o'clock. Somewhere I'll post the list of resources for all the different meditations that are happening all day, every day, all over the world on the net. Take care of yourselves. Be well as you can. And I'll probably be offering more of these. I haven't committed yet to a schedule. Partly I'm just tracking what's needed. But I will be making these available. And when you are going online to watch teachers or Dharma centers, if you have the resources, please be kind and generous if you can to the organizations or to the teachers. A lot of us who are now giving teachings freely, which I'm very, very happy to do. And it's also lovely that the community supports the teachers when they can. So with that note, let us take a moment. May our practice together be for the welfare and the happiness of all life. May our practice particularly be dedicated to those who are struggling with COVID-19, and particularly to all the healthcare professionals who are helping deal with this crisis. I'll ring the bell to ring us out. Thank you. Blessings. See you again. Take care.